Hello my friends, we are back on the SJ320 because last time I raced it I had a bit of an issue. There was lots of wind, it was the solo around the island race. I got round, I did kind of trash my mainsail a little bit, that's been off, been repaired again. It's kind of a patchwork quilt of repairs, but that is not the subject of this video. The bigger issue that I had when I got to the end of the race was that when I hit the starter button on the engine, it no worky, and the reason for that is because seawater had got into the cylinders on my engine, which is obviously not a great thing to happen to one's diesel engine. So in this episode we're going to make some modifications that probably should have been done to this boat a long time ago to make sure that doesn't happen again. If you haven't seen the show before, my name's George Isted, the Solent Boat Butler. It says it right there on the hull of my boat. This is my SJ320, which I bought about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago now, as a very tired old racing boat that I have over the last 12-14 months brought back up into reasonable condition, and I have started racing it and getting to know it and getting some reasonable performance out of it. There are a number of jobs that still need to be done. One of the big ones is I've been racing with some very old sails, and I'm in the process of sorting out replacements for them right now, but I have that bigger issue of doing the exhaust and the inlet modifications to make sure my engine works reliably. Now, I do refit and repair boats for a living. My business is called the Solent Boat Butler, so I do kind of know what I'm doing, hopefully, and so we are going to see what's going on down below, and I'll explain how the water got into my engine and how I'm going to stop it happening next time I go sailing in tasty conditions. Well, my SJ320 is powered by its original Volvo 2020 3-cylinder diesel engine. It is, like all diesel engines, cooled by seawater. So seawater is sucked up in through the sail drive leg, it then goes around the engine, it's then injected into the exhaust, and then the exhaust gases carry it away. Now, there are two ways that an engine, in terms of the cylinders of the engine, can get filled up with seawater. One is from the water coming in, and the other is from water going out through the exhaust backfilling. So we're going to start with the first bit, which is the water coming in, and at the moment on this boat there is no anti-syphon device. Now, that is normally something that looks a little bit like this. This one is from Vitus. They do a few different ones, but there are other companies around that sell similar items, and the idea of this is that you mount it high up somewhere, ideally on the center line of the boat, so that the water gets sucked up into the engine after the pump, but before the exhaust. You mount one of these so that when you switch the engine off, air can leak back into the system. There's a one-way valve in the top of this, and that stops a siphon from happening. Now, you might think, well, how does a siphon happen when I've got an impeller pump? It can. Pumps wear, they're not entirely foolproof, so water can get around the impeller in your water pump and it can siphon into your engine, and that may be one of the reasons why I had the problem. I'm not actually entirely sure, but that may be one of the issues. And to be honest with you, when I first bought the boat and ever since I've had it, I've known it didn't have an anti-syphon, and I've always looked at it and gone, probably ought to be one. But it's been like that for 30 years, so it's probably okay. Well, maybe it wasn't probably okay. So the first job we're going to do is fitting one of these. So normally you would try and fit it after it's gone through the heat exchanger, but before it's squirted into the exhaust. But that's not possible on the 2020, 2030, 2040 because the rubber boot that is on the back of the heat exchanger directly injects it into the exhaust, so it's not possible to mount an extra bit of hose in there very easily at all. So I'm going to be mounting this after the pump, but before it's injected to the front end of the heat exchanger. It actually will work totally fine there. It doesn't matter where it goes as long as it's after the water pump that is sucking up the seawater and before the exhaust. Anywhere there is absolutely fine for one of these. I'm going to have to mount it in the starboard aft cabin, and some of the hoses are unfortunately going to be on show, which isn't going to be very pretty, but ultimately this is a race boat. I do very little cruising in it. It is cruisable, and I do occasionally use it with my daughter and friends, but the reality is that most of the time I'm racing it, so a few pipes on show isn't going to worry me if it means that when I press the starter button, the engine is going to start. Now, that is the water in. Now, the water obviously also comes out the exhaust, and When the engine is quite low down in the boat, there is a risk of water getting back up the exhaust, or the water that is in the waterlock in the exhaust being able to get back up into the engine. And one way you overcome that is you have a thing called a high-rise exhaust fitting on the outside of the engine. When the water comes out, it goes up and then back down to give you a suitable drop down into the waterlock. My engine, again, does not have a high-rise exhaust, and again, it's a feature of the boat. It is not going to be very easy for me to fit a high-rise exhaust on this boat without doing some modifications to the internal joinery again, which is not ideal. So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is upgrade some of the other parts of the exhaust system to try and resolve this problem from happening again. So my exhaust comes down from the exhaust water injection fitting. It goes down into a single chamber Vetus waterlock, and my plan is to upgrade that to one of these. This is a triple chamber waterlock, so the water will come in here. There's one chamber there, then there's effectively a trap where it has to go up and over into a central section, and then up and over into a third section. I actually didn't know that these existed because I was wondering what to do with my water trap. I wanted to put a better system in, but the ones that I normally fit when I've installed new engines in clients' boats won't fit in this boat. There just isn't enough space for it. So I went searching and realised that they did this thing. They do it as a 2-chamber and as a 3-chamber. I've bought the 3-chamber because I really don't want it to happen again, and I think it is just going to fit. I've done some measurements, but I haven't actually put it in, and in fact I'm going to have to disassemble it to get it into the locker and then reassemble it where it's going to be fitted, I think. There is one last thing I'm going to do on the exhaust, and that is to fit a little swan neck in the exhaust before it goes out the back of the boat. At the moment, as I said, exhaust water comes out of the engine down to a waterlock, and then it travels slowly kind of uphill, if anything, and then out the back of the boat. And there is a chance that when I was doing my race a few weeks ago, I was in some pretty strong wind down the back of the island, lots of big waves. Water could have gotten forced back up the exhaust, filled my waterlock, and then when I started beating, all the water that was in the waterlock and in the pipework when I was beating and the boat was heeling over a long way was travelling back up into the engine through the exhaust ports on the cylinder head and into the cylinders. So what I'm going to do is bring the hose up probably 30 to 40 centimeters, so that's a foot to a foot and a half in the stern locker, through a 180-degree U-bend, back down again, and then out to the exhaust skin fitting, and that should stop any water being forced back up into the boat. Fingers crossed. So that is the plan. I'm going to start with one of those. I'll take you inside and show you the engine. Before I do, actually, there is one last thing I might try and do in this video. One of the ongoing problems that I've had for quite some time is that my engine panel doesn't really do very much. It starts the engine, it'll do the preheat, but it alarms to say that I'm overheating, even though the engine's stone cold. The oil pressure doesn't work, the tach doesn't work, the hour meter doesn't work. In fact, there's quite a lot that doesn't work. The only thing that does work is the panel on button and the start button and the preheat button. But thanks to a very, very, very nice viewer of this show, I have been donated a whole MD2020 engine, which has come out of his SJ320. Thank you very much. But excitingly, it comes with a pretty new control panel. So what I'm hoping I can do is unplug the control panel that's just down there, plug in the new one, and everything will spring to life. If it doesn't, I can then start looking at the sensors that are on the engine and swapping them out for the ones that are on the donor engine that I've got back in my workshop, and hopefully I will end up with a fully working panel. Well, here is my MD2020 3-cylinder diesel engine. As I said, it's the original one that was in the boat when it was new, as far as I know, and it is generally a pretty good little engine. When it starts, it runs well, as long as it's got no water in the fuel, which is a problem I've had, as long as the fuel tank outlet isn't blocked, which is a problem I have had, as long as it's not filling up with seawater, which is a problem that I have had. it starts and runs really well. So I'm slowly sorting out all of the problems with it. I've had oil leaks and all sorts which have slowly been resolved. But down here is the water pump. So this is a raw water pump. It has been replaced at some point because it's nice and shiny and relatively new looking. And the outlet of that goes straight up to the heat exchanger, which is this fella right here. And my intention is to take this hose off. I'm going to run a hose up along the top of the engine and then up the other side of here, and then mount my vent somewhere just about there, but on the other side, and then I can run the hose back down and across the top of the engine and into there. So this should be a fairly straightforward job. I have got what I think is the correct size hose for it, and well, there's only one way to find out. I'm going to start taking things apart. Now, just showing you for interest the hose that I'm going to be using, because these are going to be running around the engine bay and they are going to be very close to the engine. They're going to get hot. I am using a fire resistant hose. I don't need to use a fire resistant hose unless this boat was coded for charter, then you'd have to, but I am going to be using it anyway. It's not that much more expensive, and the other nice thing about this stuff is it has a wire spiral inside it, which makes it harder to cut, but it means you can bend it into quite tight radiuses and the hose doesn't close up like it would if I use something kind of cheap and nasty from the chandlery. So that's what I'm going to be using, and it should hopefully be the right size to run around. We will find out very shortly. This stuff is generally pretty easy to cut as long as you have a very sharp knife, and then when it comes to dealing with the wire that's inside, use some wire cutters. Do not use cable cutters which are designed for cutting copper cables, because copper's pretty soft and this wire is not, so you need a hardened steel blade to snip through the wire inside. It's the same with exhaust hose. Right, I've marked where I want this cut. I'm now slightly worried that I don't have enough of this hose to make my way back to the heat exchanger, but we'll find out in a minute. If necessary, I can buy some more. It just means I won't get the job done today because everything is closed now. I've done my working day and now I'm taking a break from boat works by working on my boat as opposed to a customer's boat. Snip that. Oh, there we go. The Jubilees. Needs opening up a touch. And off camera I've pre-cut the air vent, the anti-syphon, because it can do multiple sizes of hose, and I needed to cut off the smallest size because this is 3/4 inch or 19 mil. Should go on there. That should go on there. And I might not do it up yet because I might move it to that one depending on the run back to the heat exchanger. So let's see what happens if I put it in this side. Probably won't make a lot of difference, but just for the sake of argument, let's throw that on there. And the good news is I do just about have enough hose. Happy days. I thought I was going to have to stop then mid-flow, and any man will know it's not easy to stop mid-flow in any manner of doing jobs. Right, I can do that one up. There we go, anti-syphon installed. Just got to do the other end. The other thing I've got to do is down here there is a piece of furniture. So this is the rear access to the starboard side of the engine, and it has this cover that goes over it, which obviously is not going to fit very well. So what I'm going to have to do is probably try and cable tie those up and then make a little cutout in here, which is annoying because it's going to let more noise from the engine out into the aft cabin, but I don't really have a lot of choice because there isn't many places I can fit the anti-syphon on this boat and get it reasonably high. So we'll cut some holes, some little circles in there with a hole saw, and then it should plop back into position and secure. Well folks, that's it in. I'm not going to pretend that this is beautiful, but because race boat, it'll do. Maybe at some point, you know, I'll get the headlinings done, but in reality, it's a pretty low priority. I now need to switch the engine seacock back on, and I'm going to run the engine up, just check it's pumping water properly, check that no water is coming out of there. That is the one-way valve that when the engine is off and there is no longer pressure on this, should let air back in, and then I know it's all good and we can move on to the exhaust, which I may not start today. We'll see how I feel once I've done the engine test. I think we're all good, no leaks. I'm going to make a start on this exhaust system, but I'm not sure how much I'm going to get done today because it's getting on for 7 o'clock and I've been awake since 6 this morning and I've done a full day's work, but I'll do what I can, even if I just strip it all out and see if that new muffler Waterlock is going to fit. That would be a very good thing. If it doesn't fit, I'm going to have to put this Waterlock back in and just go for that loop that I spoke about earlier, which in itself should possibly be enough, but we shall see. Let me show you where everything is before I start pulling it out. Here's the view of the port back cabin. There's the back of the engine, obviously on the port side. That thing you can see in front of you there, that is the water injection elbow, which I replaced in an earlier video because it was, well, knackered and horrible. And then I also replaced the exhaust hose, so it goes down and into this locker there, and that brown thing there you can see is a 5-litre single chamber Waterlock, which is a very common sight on boats, certainly in Europe. Those Vitus Waterlocks are kind of everywhere. Then the exhaust hose carries on back through to the back of the boat. Now I have very little space in here for that Waterlock. I have measured and I think it's going to fit, but the first thing I'm going to do is drain the water that is in that Waterlock out using the little drain that's on the back of it, take it out, and then see if the new one is going to fit. I'm not going to show you me doing this because there's only so much space back here, and there will probably be some swearing because everything is really tight in there, because I wasn't that long ago that I had this thing out so that I could drain all the water out of the Waterlock. When I had the problem with the engine, first thing I did was empty the Waterlock. I wanted to see how much water was in it. It was full to the brim, and the sea water was most of the way up the tube, the exhaust tube, back into the engine, which was the first sign that I knew I had a waterlocked or hydrolocked engine. So I've had this out not that long ago. It normally involves swearing and the loss of some blood in my fingers when I cut them on things, but I'm going to crack on and get that done, and then we'll see if the new one's going to fit. Old Waterlock, folks. So this is the thing I have just removed. That is the in, that is the out, and you can kind of see how it works. the exhaust water comes into this section here, it drains down to the bottom, and you can see it has to get forced out with the exhaust gas via that sort of reverse swan neck there. So there's always going to be some water in here, but obviously as the engine runs, all the exhaust gases with the water get pushed up out the back of the boat that way. Which reminds me of one other way that you can fill your engine up with seawater, and that is when you are starting it and it doesn't start. So if you crank your engine over and over and over and it's not firing for whatever reason, and the seacock's open, you're spinning the water impeller and you're sucking seawater out, and it's getting forced through your engine, and it is slowly filling up your Waterlock. And if the engine doesn't start, it can't force that water back out of the exhaust. So if you press your starter button or turn your key for long enough, you will eventually fill this up, 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 and it will eventually fill up so much that you will return water back into your engine, which is a very bad thing. So that's the other thing to be aware of. If your engine doesn't start, it's not starting for a reason, and if you continue trying and trying and trying, you could end up with a bigger problem than maybe just running out of fuel or having air in the fuel lines, or, you know, there are many reasons why your engine might not work. So keep that in mind. Right, I have the new one here. I can already see I'm going to have to possibly cut a new hole in a little bulkhead thing down there, because the inlet on this, is that in or is that out? One of these is in. It was marked on it. In. There we go. So this is going to be much lower than the inlet on this thing here, if you can see. So if you imagine that's on the floor, I don't know, I might be able to tilt it up, I might be able to use it like that. Let's see what I can do. Well, with only a minor amount of swearing, I can confirm that this Waterlock is going to fit. I've had to take it apart, so it's in two of its three pieces, and you can see the forward piece there is not attached to the aft piece there, but I'm tired. It's getting towards the end of the day, and I am going to do a lot of swearing if I need to put that together now. So I'm going to call it a day, come back tomorrow, hopefully put the two pieces back together, and then I can connect it all up and move on to the next part of the exhaust that needs to go in. Hello folks, it's now the next day and I am fully refreshed. I am taking a couple of hours out of my working day. I've done a couple of hours work, now I'm on my own boat for a bit to try and finish off this job here. I'm struggling to get this all back together in the little locker space that I've got here. So the problem is it's keep falling out and they are kind of loose in there. This is what makes it kind of work as a one-way valve kind of inside. There are these kind of baffly things, and you can orientate them in different ways depending on how you mount this fella. So what I'm going to do to make the job slightly easier is I'm going to blob a tiny little bit of super glue on here to hold it in place just while I assemble it. And hopefully that will result in slightly less frustration, slightly less swearing. There's also a little rubber O-ring that needs to go in here, and I'll do the same with that as well. So I'm just going to try and get this all together in the locker, and I'll show you how it looks. The other thing I've done is I've screwed in a couple of little fixings into a longitudinal that runs behind the engine so that I can cable tie this up into position. The kit comes with the cable ties and everything, so it's super easy, thank you Vitus, to put this together. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes, but access obviously makes it slightly more challenging. Right, I'm going to get on. Well folks, this is warts and all, refit and sail, and I have failed. I cannot get this together back into one piece in the locker with hoses and stuff in the way, because there's some freshwater hoses, there's other cables and bits and pieces around there. I just can't get this in, it's so tight. My plan to use super glue didn't work either, because as much as super glue worked, it tried to glue my fingers together. I couldn't get the two bits of plastic to glue together with the super glue. So I am going to put it all back together as it should be, like this, and I'm going to have to go and get my oscillating saw and just remove about 10 mil of material off the bearer, which is underneath the bunk here, just to give me enough clearance to shove it in and hopefully get it all in one piece. So I'm sharing my failures and my successes here on Refit and Sail. By the way, if you like this stuff, do remember, give me a thumbs up. It shows me that you, and it shows YouTube that you like my content. If you can think of a better way to do this, do let me know in the comments. And if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button because it makes a massive difference to the growth of my channel and I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. There we go, folks. I'm pleased to say it is in. It's not all strapped down yet because I need to get that hose on there, which means pulling the excess hose out through that hole there where it goes through the bulkhead and into the aft locker. So I'm going to climb into the aft locker shortly, pull that through and then connect it up. I have followed the actual instructions and it says mount it as horizontally as possible, which I can definitely do. It's pretty horizontal there underneath the bunk. I've got the hose on that end, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this hose clamp right here. This hose clamp I put on because I had it available when I was putting the exhaust together, but as it turns out, one of my viewers runs a company that makes clamps for boats in this sort of environment, and he said, really George, you're using the wrong sort of clamp there. They might look very strong, but actually you're better off using like a JCS Jubilee clip like this, because you get far more clamping pressure with one of these than you do with one of those. So I'm going to be swapping out this thing. It's a copy of a super clamp. It's not actually a super clamp. It's probably a cheap Chinese knockoff of a super clamp. I just happen to have it in my box. That's what I used, and to be honest with you, I didn't know any better, and every day's a school day. I'm always happy to be corrected. If you see something in one of my videos that you're not too sure about, do feel free to drop me a comment, because I can't know it all. I'm not going to say that was easy, but this is now in. Let me show you what it looks like. There we go, that's the aft end all connected up, and I've got the cable tie on there as well, holding it up against the kind of lateral bulkhead thing that's in there. Same there, everything's all connected up. It's all horizontal, and that should now quite happily collect up and hold any water that is in the hose, which obviously goes up there. So when the engine's switched off, any water will run back and hopefully just be held in there. Now my plans have evolved ever so slightly, having been in that aft locker and had a little bit of a think about what's best to do. That new Waterlock I've just put in will hold the water that will potentially run back towards the engine when the engine is switched off, because the hose goes up. Now my plan was to put a further high Swan-neck that comes up and back down before the water exits out of the boat, but that increases the size of the hose run, which potentially increases the amount of water that is in the hose that will run back towards the new Waterlock that I've put in. So I have come up with an alternative solution, which means that I can actually reuse the Waterlock I've just taken out. So you join me in the aft locker, which actually spans the width of the boat, but I'm in the port side where the exhaust hose comes out. Now, as you saw, the exhaust hose comes up vertically from the Waterlock that I've just installed, and my plan was to put a Swan-neck up in here, and then so the water then exits out. But as I said, I'm worried the water will run back and overfill the Waterlock that's there. But I have still got this Waterlock here. So what I'm now thinking of doing, and there's no reason I can think of not to have two Waterlocks, is to attach this where the hose comes out through the bulkhead, and then run my Swan-neck up and out from here, because that means any water that is in that Swan-neck will get held in this, and it shouldn't run back to the first Waterlock that comes out of the engine. It does mean there will be a small amount of additional back pressure on the exhaust system, but I think it will be very, very minimal and well worth it, because this engine is quite low in this boat. It has a very shallow bilge, and running a second Waterlock might be actually a really smart move and a good way of adding some additional protection in on the exhaust side. So fortunately, I think this is literally the right height to slot straight in to this exhaust hose down here. Unfortunately, it's very hard for me to show you that. And then a little loop up and away I go. that's it installed. Got a nice big swan neck, comes up probably getting on for 2 foot, so 2/3 of a metre. And then any water that is in here, when the engine gets switched off, will drain into this Waterlock. It won't go all the way back to the Waterlock that is obviously back near the engine. And this should stop any following seas throwing water up into the exhaust, because it's got to go up quite a long way before it can go up the exhaust. This is all a bit belt and braces, but it seems to make sense to use this Waterlock again and have the opportunity to provide some additional protection to the engine. The only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just cable tie this up. So I need to screw a fixing into the transom. There's fortunately a bit of wood up there which the backstay is attached to, so I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to start the engine, check it all for leaks, but I'm also going to be checking it for how noisy it is, because one of the other benefits of fitting that triple chamber Waterlock was that it is a noise reduction Waterlock over a standard one like this. Now I've obviously now got 2 Waterlocks in the system, so I'm expecting a much quieter exhaust, which will be nice, because there was a fair amount of exhaust noise with this boat, which was kind of annoying if you were on a long motor, which I have done a couple with this boat. So I'm looking forward to trying it out. Well folks, as you can see, engine is running and I have checked there are no leaks on any of the connections. I think the exhaust is actually a little bit quieter, or you can hear as water coming out rather than kind of exhaust note. Interestingly, now I can't hear the exhaust coming out of the back. I can hear more of the exhaust and the engine noise in the boat maybe. It's hard to tell, but maybe that's just my imagination. Right, I'm going to call that done. I'm going to move on to swapping out the engine panel, and hopefully I'll have some warning lights that actually work. Well, there's the old panel that came with the boat that barely works, and in front of it I have the new second-hand panel, which looks in considerably better condition. And I'm hoping, looking at the back of it, it has that connector there, that connector there. Fingers crossed it is just a case of plug and play. However, this is an old boat and it may have been hacked about with. Who knows? I'm going to unscrew it, see what I can do. If it's an easy job, I'm going to do it. If it's not, I'm going to put that back on, come back to it another day, because I really need to go and do some actual paid work, unfortunately. I am slightly in shock. I just did a boat job that should be a quick boat job, and it's turned out to be a quick boat job, albeit I haven't actually refitted the panel, but that's just a case of getting some sealant and 4 screws and it's back in. But new panel on, starts straight up, all the warning lights work, all the warning buzzers work. When I switch it off, all the alarms go on because it's not charging and there's low oil pressure and all that sort of good stuff. So that was a very easy, quick win. If you're the gentleman who gave me that engine with this panel, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Well folks, that is the job done as much as I'm going to show you in this video. I know in the previous video when I had the problem, the water got into the cylinders, a huge number of people who watched that did write in the comments, how did the water get in there? Or how did the water get in there and how are you going to stop it happening again? So if you are one of those people, hopefully you can drop me another comment to say that all made sense, or you missed a bit, or whatever. Do let me know if you are one of those people. Thank you very much. Give me a thumbs up, do subscribe. And if you are one of the people that support the show financially using the PayPal link that is down in the description, which buys me beers, cameras, microphones, lights, and all that sort of good stuff, thank you very, very much. You are awesome. You do keep the lights on here at Refit and Sail. Still coming up on this boat, we have some more work to do. I need to replace the windows. I've got some other internal structural stuff that I want to have a look at some point, maybe over the winter. There are further upgrades. I have some sails sort of on order. I will talk about that in a future video, all about the sails and the changes that I'm making. So do stay tuned, because I've got a Contessa up there. I've got an SNS 34 turning up in 2 days. I've got another Contessa turning up for a refit in about 4 weeks. So I've got plenty to keep you entertained on Refit and Sail. See you next time. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.